5 true scary Halloween stories that will haunt you. Real ghost tales from a haunted party. The air around the grand, isolated mansion felt alive that Halloween night, pulsating with a strange, unexplainable energy. Perched atop a hill, the house loomed, drenched in shadows cast by towering trees and faintly glowing jack-o'-lanterns placed along the winding path up to the front door. Flickering candlelight spilled from curtained windows, casting eerie silhouettes that moved as though alive. Even before stepping through the heavy ancient door, guests felt a chill, not the usual October cold, but a chill that seemed to seep into their bones, as though the house itself were a living, breathing entity, waiting for them to come closer. Inside, the decorations were no less unsettling. Cobwebs hung in thick clusters across the high, arched ceilings. Old framed portraits lined the walls, their eyes following the partygoers as they passed. A grand staircase, bathed in shadow, spiraled upwards, leading to rooms cloaked in mystery, rooms that even the host warned were best left alone. The whispers of music played softly, but it was as though the melody came from nowhere in particular, drifting from one side of the room to another without any visible source. Guests, dressed in elaborate costumes, mingled, their voices a mix of laughter and hushed tones. They clinked glasses and traded stories of ghost sightings, each trying to one-up the other with tales of strange happenings or eerie encounters. Yet beneath the laughter, there was an unmistakable tension in the air, a collective unease no one could quite put into words. Every now and then, someone would look over their shoulder, feeling as though they were being watched, only to see nothing but shadows. The host of the evening, a tall, mysterious figure who introduced himself simply as Lucian, moved among his guests with an otherworldly grace. He greeted everyone warmly, though his eyes, cold and dark as obsidian, held a strange, knowing glint. Lucian was an enigma. No one seemed to know his background or where he had come from, but all who were invited to this exclusive Halloween gathering knew that it would be a night to remember. As the clock struck midnight, Lucian gathered everyone into the dimly lit drawing room, his voice smooth yet commanding. "Welcome," he began, his voice barely a whisper yet, carrying effortlessly through the room, silencing every murmured conversation. "Tonight is no ordinary Halloween. Tonight, the line between the living and the others is thinner than usual. As you celebrate, know that this house has a history, a dark one. Some of the guests you see around you may not have been invited by me, or anyone for that matter." A nervous chuckle rippled through the crowd, but Lucian continued, his gaze intense. "They say the spirits are restless tonight. Some guests may come and go without a word, and some, well, they may stay. But remember, whatever you see or hear, do not question it. And above all, do not look too closely at any faces you don't recognize. Halloween is a night for tricks as well as treats, and some tricks never end." As he spoke, the air grew thick with anticipation, the warm glow of the candles seeming to dim ever so slightly. The laughter and chatter from before was now replaced by an uneasy silence, the partygoers shifting uncomfortably, casting glances around the room. The warning lingered in the air like smoke, and in the quiet that followed, the house itself seemed to respond, the walls creaking softly as though settling in, preparing for the stories that were about to unfold. One guest, in a vintage costume with an intricately carved mask covering his face, was the first to break the silence. "So, Lucian," he began with a forced cheer, trying to shake off the mounting dread, "do you have any stories for us? Maybe something to, get us into the Halloween spirit?" Lucian's eyes sparkled as he took a step closer, his gaze steady. "Oh, I have stories," he replied softly. "In fact, I have 5, each more chilling than the last. But beware, for each of these tales isn't merely fiction. They are truths, events that happened on nights like this one, in places much like this." He paused, letting his words sink in. "These stories are, shall we say, invitations for those who might want to join us tonight." At this, the room grew colder. The once playful atmosphere had shifted completely, and everyone listened, transfixed. Story 1: The Phantom Guest. The air inside the grand hall thickened as the Halloween party unfolded, laughter blending with the soft, eerie echoes that seemed to drift from the walls. Amid the flurry of costumed guests, a figure in a vintage mask lingered near the edges of the crowd, their tall frame draped in an old-fashioned black suit, topped with a high collar and gloves that looked worn by time itself. The mask was elegant yet unsettling, featuring hollow eyes, painted a stark shade of black that seemed to absorb all light, and delicate, faded embellishments reminiscent of an era long past. No one knew who this guest was, but on Halloween, it was common to leave such mysteries untouched, as though solving them might somehow break the delicate spell of the night. At first, the stranger went unnoticed, blending into the flow of guests who mingled and danced, stopping only to refill glasses or laugh at each other's costumes. But as the night went on, people began to murmur. The masked figure moved gracefully but quietly, gliding through the crowd without ever joining a conversation or acknowledging anyone. Some guests tried to approach them, curious or simply trying to be friendly, yet each time the figure would vanish. One moment they were standing near the fireplace, gazing intently into the flames. The next they'd disappear, only to be spotted minutes later near the bar or by the grand staircase. Guests whispered to one another, exchanging uneasy glances. "Do you know who that is?" A woman in a flapper costume asked her friend, nodding toward the masked figure who was now standing alone by a darkened window, the moonlight casting a spectral glow around them. Her friend shook his head, frowning. "I thought it was just part of the party," he replied, his voice uncertain. "But it's strange, isn't it? No one seems to know who they are." The host, sensing the tension building among his guests, began circulating, asking quietly if anyone recognized the extra guest. Some laughed it off, claiming it was probably just someone playing a clever prank. But as the evening stretched on, the laughter faded. The mysterious figure never removed their mask, never uttered a single word, and never seemed to join in the festivities. Their silence, combined with their ghostly presence, started to create a ripple of unease among the guests. The final straw came when the host's elderly aunt, a stern, sharp-eyed woman named Eleanor, who knew the history of the house like no one else, spotted the figure lingering near a side table laden with dusty, antique picture frames. Eleanor approached, her eyes narrowing as she scrutinized the mask. For a moment, she froze, her face going pale beneath her painted cheeks. "That mask," she whispered to her nephew, who had come over to see what was wrong. Her voice trembled slightly as she continued. "That mask belonged to Ambrose, your great-uncle. He wore it the night he died, right here in this house." Eleanor's words sent a chill through the host, who stared at her, hoping she was mistaken. But Eleanor was rarely wrong when it came to family history, especially about Ambrose, who had been something of a family legend, or rather, a cautionary tale. Ambrose had been a secretive man who kept mostly to himself, even in life. The story went that he had fallen in love with someone the family had disapproved of, a woman rumored to practice strange arts. When he died unexpectedly at a family gathering one Halloween, some whispered that he'd made a dark pact, a bargain that had somehow gone wrong. The host turned, scanning the room, and there, standing before an old tarnished mirror, was the phantom guest, their reflection hazy and distorted in the dim light. Guests fell silent as they followed the host's gaze, their eyes fixed on the figure as they reached up, removing the mask with slow, deliberate hands. As the mask lifted, gasps echoed through the hall. The face beneath was not human. It was a hollow, eyeless void. A blank expanse where eyes, a nose, and a mouth should have been. Yet somehow that empty face seemed to stare back at them through the mirror, holding each person's gaze with a chilling intensity. Frozen in horror, the guests watched as the eyeless figure tilted its head, as if silently acknowledging the group. A whispered hush swept through the room as the figure slowly placed the mask back over its face, concealing the void once more. But the sense of dread lingered, palpable and unrelenting, seeping into each guest like the chill of an icy wind. The figure took a step back, seeming to dissolve into the shadows cast by the flickering candlelight. One blink, and they were gone, vanished as mysteriously as they had arrived, leaving only the faint scent of something old and decaying in the air. For a long moment, no one moved, held captive by the fear that the figure might return. And then Eleanor, who had been staring at the mirror, broke the silence, her voice a thin whisper. "Sometimes," she murmured, "Halloween isn't just for us. It's a night for those who left this world without answers, without peace. Tonight, Ambrose came home." The party ended early that night, the guests departing in uneasy silence, their footsteps echoing down the long, winding path away from the house. No one looked back, each too haunted by the memory of that eyeless face staring back at them from the shadows. It was a reminder, one they would carry with them long after the night was over, that Halloween wasn't just a night for playing dress-up. It was a night when the dead returned to mingle among the living, searching perhaps for closure, for recognition, or simply for a reminder that they, too, had once been a part of the world they left behind. Story 2. The Haunted Mirror. The echo of laughter and chatter faded as Tom wandered further from the main party, his curiosity drawing him up the creaky staircase of the old house. The hallways upstairs were dimly lit, dust motes drifting lazily in the air, and each step seemed to be swallowed by an eerie silence. It was as if the air itself grew denser here, tinged with the scent of something old and forgotten. Tom shivered, but something, an urge he couldn't quite place, compelled him forward, leading him to a room at the end of the hall. Inside, a large ornate mirror loomed against the far wall, its surface clouded with a thin layer of dust that clung stubbornly despite the room's stillness. The frame was intricate, decorated with strange carvings of unfamiliar symbols, twisting vines, and a single figure etched into the top, staring down with a gaze so intense it almost felt alive. Tom moved closer, drawn to the mirror's unsettling charm. As he wiped a hand across the glass, his reflection sharpened, but something felt off. Shadows lingered in the background, flickering and shifting, even though the room behind him was empty. He frowned, turning to glance over his shoulder. Nothing. Just the bare walls and sparse furniture, bathed in a wash of dim light from the single sputtering bulb overhead. But as he turned back to the mirror, his blood ran cold. Behind his own reflection, faint figures moved in the background, shifting and swaying, their forms barely discernible yet unmistakably there. Shadows that were too solid, with faces too blurred to be human. They seemed to watch him, and though their eyes, or what might have been eyes, were dark pits, he could feel their attention, as if they were studying him from beyond the veil of glass. The faintest whispers began to tickle his ears, words just beyond comprehension, seeping into his mind like a cold mist. He leaned closer, trying to make sense of the murmurs, his breath fogging up the mirror's surface. But then he saw it, his reflection's face, contorted in an expression of growing fear. It wasn't mirroring his own. He was only staring, calm yet tense, while his reflection's mouth trembled, widening as if to scream. Panic prickled through him as his reflection's hands rose, pressing against the inside of the mirror as though it were trapped on the other side, trying to escape. It stared back at him with pleading eyes, mouth open in a silent scream, pounding on the glass with a desperation that shook him to his core. He took a shaky step back, heart hammering, but the reflection remained, pressing harder, as if it wanted nothing more than to break free. Unable to contain his terror, Tom turned and bolted out of the room, his footsteps thundering down the hall as he gasped for breath. He stumbled back into the crowded room below, frantically grabbing at the nearest friend he could find. "Come with me," he stammered, his face pale. "You have to see this. It's in the mirror upstairs." Several friends, sensing his genuine panic, followed him up the stairs, their laughter fading into cautious curiosity as they reached the room. Tom pushed the door open, half expecting to see his screaming reflection still trapped behind the glass. But as they entered, the room was empty. The mirror standing innocently against the wall, its surface calm and undisturbed. He stepped closer, trying to make sense of what he had seen. But then his eyes caught something chilling. A single faint handprint, pressed into the center of the glass, lingering there as if it had been burned into the surface from the other side. He raised his own hand, pressing it against the cold glass in disbelief. But the print didn't match his own. And no matter how hard they rubbed, no matter how much they tried to clean it away, the handprint remained, like a spectral reminder of something, or someone left behind. They left the room in silence, each one casting a wary glance back at the mirror before pulling the door shut. Tom could still hear the faint whispers echoing in his mind as they walked away, haunted by the thought that some mirrors were never meant for decoration. They were windows, glimpses into places and presences beyond their understanding. Story 3. The Basement Dweller. The Halloween party buzzed above, but downstairs, the basement lurked in silence, cloaked in mystery. As the evening wore on, a few brave souls, egged on by one too many ghost stories and a daring spirit born of Halloween, gathered near the door leading down. Someone had mentioned a hidden speakeasy buried in the basement, a remnant from Prohibition days that might still hide its secrets within the house's crumbling foundations. Giggling nervously, they opened the door and descended into the musty darkness. A wave of cold air wrapped around them as they stepped onto the old, creaking stairs. Shadows clung to the walls, and the sparse light from above barely touched the depths of the basement below. Each step seemed to absorb the sounds from upstairs, as though the basement was a world of its own, separate from the raucous laughter and cheers echoing above. At the bottom of the stairs, they found themselves in a large, open room, the air thick with dust that stirred with each footfall. The remnants of old furniture were scattered across the room, covered in mold and cobwebs. But as their eyes adjusted to the dimness, they spotted something strange. A cluster of children's toys, lying in a pile near a shadowed corner. Dolls, tiny wooden blocks, and a single, weathered teddy bear lay still, looking out of place amidst the dank surroundings. They exchanged uneasy glances, each one questioning who could have left these relics behind in such a cold, forgotten space. The toys were coated in dust and seemed untouched, as though no one had disturbed them for decades. One of them, a doll with faded blue eyes and tangled hair, lay on its side, its gaze fixed unblinking into the shadows. Just then, the faintest sound of footsteps echoed through the room. They froze, scanning the dim corners, but the basement was empty, at least as far as they could tell. Their breaths came quicker, and someone whispered, "Did you hear that?" The others nodded, their eyes wide as they clung together. The footsteps continued, soft and slow, pattering around them like someone or something circling. Then, out of the corner of his eye, one of them saw a small figure dart across the floor. A brief, childlike shape, low to the ground, scurrying quickly before disappearing behind an old dresser. He swallowed hard, pointing to where he'd seen the movement. "There, did you see it?" "Something, someone?" Another whispered, "Maybe it's just rats." But they all felt it, that uncanny sensation of being watched, of a presence lurking just out of sight, waiting, watching. The footsteps grew louder, echoing around the basement, and the air grew colder. Their breath misted in front of them, and as they backed up, something caught their eye in the dusty mirror propped against the far wall. In the reflection, a shadowy child's face stared back at them, eyes wide and hollow, lips parted as if about to speak. The face was faint, almost blurred, as though it were trapped within the glass itself. One of them dared to glance over his shoulder, but the face wasn't there, only in the mirror, watching them with an expression that seemed both frightened and furious. They stood frozen, each one unable to look away from the child's eyes in the reflection, the expression growing sharper, more intense, as if pleading for release. Then the lights flickered, casting everything into darkness for a split second. When they blinked back on, the face in the mirror was gone, but the feeling remained, thick and oppressive. Panicked, they turned and bolted for the stairs, their hearts pounding as they scrambled up, desperate to escape the chill that seemed to chase them out. They slammed the basement door shut, gasping for breath. But their curiosity was still piqued, and they knew they couldn't let it go just yet. Heading to the study, they found an old record book, dusty and forgotten, tucked away on a shelf. Flipping through its brittle pages, they stumbled upon a single entry, nearly faded with age, that detailed the mysterious disappearance of a young child who had once lived in the house. The child, only 6 years old, had vanished without a trace, last seen playing in the basement on a cold October night, just like this one. There was no explanation, only a somber note that he was never found. A chill settled over them as they read, the story falling into place. The basement was more than dark and musty. It was haunted by the memory of a lost soul, trapped and left to wander, searching for release. They glanced back at the basement door, the image of the shadowy face etched into their minds, an unspoken warning. Some places hold on to the souls of those taken too soon, clinging to the memories that linger long after the world forgets. Story 4. The Masked Figure. The party was in full swing when a guest arrived dressed in the most unnervingly realistic mask anyone had ever seen. It wasn't a mask of horror or blood, but something far stranger, almost too lifelike, with smooth, flawless skin and glassy eyes that seemed to follow each movement around it. People stopped to stare as the figure moved among the guests, their silence unsettling. The mask's face was unnervingly detailed, with eyes that caught the flickering lights as if they were real, shimmering with an unnatural gleam. Compliments poured in as partygoers approached, impressed by the mask's lifelike quality. "Where did you get that mask?" they asked, nudging each other with a mixture of curiosity and discomfort. But the guest merely nodded, offering a small, eerie smile before moving on. They never spoke, their silence casting an uneasy shadow over the evening. The more the guest moved around, the stranger it became. Each time someone tried to engage them in conversation, the figure would just smile, eyes tracking them with an almost unnatural awareness before slipping away. No one could quite remember seeing them approach from any particular direction, and each time they reappeared, it was as though they had materialized out of thin air. The masked figure became a dark thread woven into the night's tapestry, casting a surreal pall over the festivities. People began whispering among themselves, feeling inexplicably unnerved. "It's just a costume," they told each other, laughing it off, but the laughter always sounded forced. Some swore they saw the mask's eyes flicker, as though blinking, and one guest even claimed the mask's expression changed when no one else was looking. But whenever they looked closely, the face remained perfectly still, frozen in its eerie smile. Then, at some point past midnight, a daring guest, determined to unravel the mystery, managed to corner the masked figure near a darkened alcove. With a slight tremor in his voice, he urged the guest to remove the mask. "Come on," he said, half challenging, half pleading. "Let us see who you really are." To his surprise, the figure nodded. Slowly, almost theatrically, they raised their hands to their face and began to peel back the mask. A few others had gathered nearby, watching with a mixture of fascination and dread as the mask came away. But instead of revealing a familiar face beneath, there was another identical face, eyes wide and glistening, with that same frozen, eerie smile. The crowd fell silent, a chilling horror creeping over them. It was as if the mask had never been a mask at all, but just another layer of an endless disguise. Someone muttered, "This has to be a trick," but they could hardly believe it themselves. The figure's face, perfectly identical to the mask, moved with strange, jerky precision, the unsettling grin never fading. Someone else demanded, "Who are you?" The figure only stared back, grinning wider as though reveling in the confusion and unease they'd sown. A few of the braver guests attempted to get closer, but every time they reached out, the figure slipped away, dissolving into the crowd, leaving only whispers and shivers in their wake. As the night wore on, the masked guest appeared and disappeared at will, each time with that same unsettling face, no voice, no explanation. People began avoiding them, each caught between a strange mix of fear and intrigue. They could feel that something was very wrong, but no one dared to confront the figure again. Instead, they kept their distance, nervously watching from the corners of their eyes, hoping the stranger wouldn't approach them next. Then, as the party wound down and guests began to leave, someone noticed something peculiar. A mask, the same eerie, lifelike mask, was lying on a small table near the exit, perfectly placed as if waiting to be found. Yet the guest who had worn it was nowhere to be seen. The host picked up the mask, feeling its cold, smooth surface, and realized that they hadn't the slightest idea who the masked guest had been. They couldn't recall anyone arriving with such a mask, nor did they remember anyone introducing themselves. The masked figure had simply appeared. The unease spread like wildfire through the remaining crowd. No one had seen the guest leave, and the chilling reality sank in. They had no name, no face, and no answers. They had merely left their mask behind, a lingering reminder of their silent, eerie presence. A final, chilling thought struck the host as they held the mask. Some guests don't come to Halloween parties to hide behind masks. They come to wear faces that conceal far more sinister intentions. Story 5. The Vanishing Host. The Halloween party was in full swing, each corner of the grand, isolated estate glowing with jack-o'-lanterns, eerie candlelight, and shadows cast from cobweb chandeliers. The host, a lively character who'd gone to extravagant lengths to make this Halloween night unforgettable, had been present just moments before, making rounds and chatting with guests. But suddenly it was as if they had vanished into thin air. At first, no one was concerned. It was Halloween after all, and everyone expected a few tricks. But as the minutes stretched on, the guests started to notice the oddness of it all. The host was not one to disappear for long, and as they looked around the room and whispered among themselves, some speculated that maybe this was part of the act, a grand Halloween prank to keep everyone on edge. Yet the disappearance felt strange, even for a prank, and an inexplicable chill crept through the room, making everyone's laughter a little more nervous, their conversations hushed. Then, a young woman named Elise stepped forward, her face pale as she tried to catch her breath. She'd been outside near the edge of the grounds, she explained, where an old family crypt stood, a place no one dared explore in the dark. Elise's voice trembled as she recounted seeing a shadowy figure leading someone down toward the crypt. "I'm almost certain it was the host," she whispered, looking at the others with wide eyes. They didn't look right, and the figure beside them, it wasn't one of us. Her words sent an icy shiver through the crowd. But curiosity mixed with dread was an irresistible force. A small group decided to go investigate. Flashlights in hand, they made their way to the crypt, following the damp, overgrown path through the mist. The crypt loomed ahead, silent and foreboding, its stone exterior blanketed in moss and creeping ivy. The air around it was noticeably colder, and as they reached the entrance, the door, usually locked tight, was slightly ajar, creaking as the wind nudged it open further. Taking hesitant steps inside, they found the crypt empty, filled only with the stale scent of earth and decay. Yet something felt disturbingly wrong, as if they weren't alone. They swept their flashlights around, illuminating the old stone walls and cracked floor. There, in the dust, they saw something that made their blood run cold. A trail of footprints leading deeper inside to the back of the crypt, where a narrow staircase led down into the unknown. The temperature dropped further, and one of them swore they felt a light brush against their shoulder, as if something unseen had reached out. They called the host's name, but only silence greeted them. Nerves frayed, they backed out of the crypt, reluctant to descend the staircase. Still, the mystery lingered as they returned to the party, where tension had replaced the earlier revelry. Hours passed, and the festivities, which had once filled the rooms with laughter, began to wane as worry took hold. No one knew what to make of the cryptic scene at the crypt, nor the eerie chill that still clung to the air. Just as the party was winding down and the guests prepared to leave, the host reappeared, looking dazed, their face drained of color. They glanced around as if seeing the room for the first time, their eyes unfocused and distant. A few guests, relieved and yet unnerved, rushed over to greet them. But the host didn't seem to recognize them, blinking as though emerging from a dream. "What happened?" someone asked, concern lacing their words. The host looked at them, brow furrowing as they struggled to remember. I don't know," they murmured. "I feel like I've been in a strange place all night, somewhere dark and cold. I thought it was a dream, but it didn't feel like a dream." They trailed off, shivering slightly as though recalling something terrible, yet indistinct. Their gaze drifted toward the window, where the crypt lay hidden in the shadows beyond. As they prepared to leave, someone noticed something peculiar on the host's shoulder, a faint, ghostly handprint, barely visible, as if left by a cold touch that had not fully faded from this world. A collective shiver ran through those who saw it, a chilling reminder that some presences had made themselves known that night. None of the guests spoke of it directly, yet as they left, each felt an unspoken dread settle upon them. A strange feeling that the spirits of the house hadn't just observed the party, but had played an unsettling role of their own. And as they filed out, the host remained behind, standing in the empty doorway, that faint handprint still visible in the dim light. It was a mark left by something from the shadows, a silent claim, a whisper from the beyond that warned any future guests. When you host a party in a haunted house, the spirits don't merely linger. Sometimes they take part in the celebration, and sometimes they even claim the host as their own. As the last echoes of laughter and whispers faded from the grand, shadow-laden house and the guests departed into the night, a quiet unease hung in the air. The narrator gathered everyone for one final tale, a reflective parting thought about Halloween, a night when the supernatural mingles with the living, drawn by flickering lights, echoing laughter, and the thrill of festivities. Halloween, the narrator began, voice low and filled with reverence, isn't merely a celebration of costumes and candy. It's a time when spirits edge closer, drawn to us by our willingness to embrace the unusual. As the stories tonight have shown, every one of these guests, the phantom visitors, the eerie reflections, the masked faces, and vanishing souls, could easily find their way into any gathering, any party, slipping through the veil as easily as one steps through a door. The guests nodded, some shivering as they recalled the evening's unsettling tales, others casting cautious glances around the dimly lit room. The jack-o'-lanterns by the door, once cheerful, now seemed to hold darker secrets in their carved expressions, flickering with a life of their own. The narrator continued, weaving their gaze across the room with a serious, knowing smile. On Halloween, the dead and the living are closer than you think. Tonight's stories were reminders that sometimes the line blurs just a little too much. The spirit world does not care for boundaries. It's drawn to life, to the brightness and noise we create. So next Halloween, if you happen to hear an extra pair of footsteps behind you or catch sight of a face you don't quite recognize, perhaps don't look too closely or ask too many questions. A nervous laugh rippled through the crowd, but the narrator held up a hand, face somber yet warm. Just smile. Offer them some candy. They may not stay long, but for one night, they too are guests at the party. And with that final thought, the guests slowly filed out, some lingering at the door, as though half expecting to glimpse one of the night's spectral visitors waving them off. As the last of them drifted into the cool autumn night, the house stood silent once more, its shadows deepening as the candles went out, one by one. The echoes of laughter and whispers seemed to linger just a little longer than they should have, as if the spirits who had joined the Halloween festivities weren't quite ready to leave. And perhaps, just perhaps, they'd be back next year.